Greetings and shalom again. Thank you for clicking on part 5, titled the Ezekiel 33 Warning. And in part 4 I had concluded on expounding upon Ezekiel chapter 33 and also some supportive scriptures from the Brit Hadashah, as we also may say in English, the New Covenant scriptures. For example, in James chapter 5 verses 19 and 20, reading that, and also what our Messiah taught right from the book of Matthew in chapter 7 verses 22 and 23. And in part 1 and 2, in summary, I just explained how in the 12 tribes of Israel, how Ezekiel is writing to the whole house of Israel. But at that time, 10 tribes had broken off over 100 years before that and gone into captivity. And so Judah, which was Benjamin joining in with Judah, and some of the Levitical priesthood that had not gone with the 10 tribes, were all together in the nation of Judah. And how this has caused an identity crisis, especially in our modern times. And to make it even more so confusing, we could see in the 20th century, in 1948, how the Jewish people were allowed restoration of their own country, their own state, nation, in the Holy Land, and they named it Israel. And wouldn't it make a whole lot more sense to just call the nation Judah? Because that's really what they were. They were Judah, but the 10 tribes are still scattered. They're still lost throughout the 4 corners of the earth. But I think our Father had another plan. He wanted it, He inspired it to be named Israel, because His plan is to bring us all back, not just the Jewish people. Of course, the gospel, as Paul said, was to go to the Jew first. And then Messiah also said, go rather to the lost sheep of Israel, and also the Gentiles, to be grafted in to Israel. And Israel simply means prevailers, with men and with Yah. And so we are to be prevailers, Israelites. And the book of Ezekiel was written as a prophetic book for the 10 tribes of a future Holocaust and captivity that still has not happened yet to this day. As I give this message to this day, I am speaking as a type of Ezekiel 33 watchman. And if you don't feel inspired to go out and witness to people and to be an Ezekiel watchman, as I mentioned in part 4, well, then you can support those who do. And try to do it to your own friends and family in a loving way. Again, we're not trying to cram anything down anybody's throat, but to simply be a watchman and receive the blessings that come with it, or will receive the cursings with it. And that scripture that came to me in part 4 that I couldn't remember is in the book of Matthew chapter 10. And it's referring to what our Messiah says in chapter 40. He says, "He who receives you receives me. And he who receives me receives him who sent me. And he who receives a prophet in the name of the prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives a righteous man," or we could say a righteous woman, "in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward." Now often the book of, the language of Hebrew is also more of a feminine and masculine language. So whenever it's referring to both men and women, it'll choose the masculine term. And so I think that was inspired even through the Greek here. When it says a righteous man, it's referring to all of us. When we receive righteous people and prophets, we can receive also their rewards. So support each other. Support those who are doing it. And that's my encouragement to you. especially if you don't feel like you've been called to be an Ezekiel 33 watchman. And remember the widow who gave to Elijah during that famine in 1 Kings chapter 17, and how her and her son had her last portion of bread and water, and she shared that last meal with Elijah and was blessed tremendously. So we see a lot of encouragement to support righteous prophets and men and people who are out there doing the work. And I would like to encourage you to do it in any way you can feel inspired. And also in regard to a warning that our Messiah said in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 6. He says, "Do not give what is holy to the dogs, or cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and tear you to pieces." So we do have to exercise wisdom and discernment and judgment and discern the spirits, know them by their fruits. Of course, we shouldn't just be out judging people and condemning people, but having wisdom, being wise as serpents and harmless as doves, but still, in times when necessary and inspired, to be an Ezekiel 33 warning, realizing that there are blessings that come with it as well as cursings if we hold back when we should give a faithful witness to somebody. And always remembering the book of Daniel, as we're told in Daniel, at the end of Daniel chapter 12 and in verse 3, it says, "And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever."